associate professor at Kalamazoo College, and he came in from Kalamazoo this morning to talk to us. Richard.
Hi everybody, thanks for having me. Really, this has really been a learning experience for me already. I was trained as a photographer and I'm a digital photographer, of course, at this point, but I'm interested in maps for this project I'm working on. But this has all been sort of new to me, so it's quite astounding. And I already see lots of possibilities for what I've been learning here today. Let me just show you. Oh, and I want to thank Sandra for having me, sort of inviting me here sight unseen. Through the mechanisms of a Mellon top-off grant, I'm going on sabbatical next year for most of the year, 2/3 of my year. We're on quarters over at Kalamazoo College. There's sort of an encouragement to connect with people at U of M. So I guess I want to thank the Mellon as well for allowing me to be here. So, this is a project I started. Let's see, where we go. Keys. It's a project I started last year. I started photographing, doing landscape photography along the first Transcontinental Railroad between Omaha, Nebraska, and Sacramento, California. So I can show you just a couple of my photographs here. I'm using a digital camera with a special tripod head that allows me to photograph several pictures sideways. I turn my camera sideways and I photograph this way, but the tripod head actually pivots on the center of the lens. So once I digitally stitch all my pictures together, it goes very smoothly and sort of faultlessly. So that's what you're seeing here, these long panoramic pictures. And in Photoshop, I can use a filter that Photoshop has to take out some of the distortion that happens regardless, even with the camera spinning like that, you can get some distortion in geometric shapes like straight railroad tracks or things like that. It'll look curved, so in Photoshop I can take that out if I want to.
Is that like a slap camera?
I don't know what that is.
That's the old style. They used to take big pictures of people. The camera that would go like this across.
It would actually spin and move?
Yeah, well, somehow the aperture would go like this across. So somebody at this end of a group would run over to the other side and be in the picture twice.
It's similar, but I'm doing it all manually like that. There are mechanical cameras that take panoramas. Some of them spin all the way around. And I think I know the camera you're talking about. It's sort of a classic mechanical camera.
Yeah,
I guess I'm doing something similar to that, sort of by hand. So my main thing is photography, but and I would like to do an old-fashioned book, made out of paper and have lots of photographs in it. The reason I sort of contacted people here in Michigan was I've been unhappy with a lot of the maps that are in books. I've been reading a lot of the histories, and my project is really designed to be an accompaniment to the classic or the go-to history by David Howard Bain, or the more popular one, Stephen Ambrose on the Transcontinental Railroad. But now, of course, after seeing this talk, I'm thinking that maybe maybe both, right? I'll have a book, but I can see this as really being a thing that lives in the cloud, and people can travel along, somehow get all this information when they're out in the field at a location or at home as well. So I'm really excited. This is a little-known sort of monument built to one of the founders of the Union Pacific Railroad that sits on top of Sherman Summit in Wyoming, in between Cheyenne and Laramie. The railroad doesn't go by there any longer, but this 65-foot pyramid made out of stone. And of course, Oaks Ames is one of the ones who eventually got kicked out of the Senate for bribery. So it's a really interesting, rich history. With robber barons and everything. So it's been really fun for me to take this on. Some of the sites along the way. I was really interested in what Sandra's doing with her historical project here in town. A lot of these, there's many famous photographs taken in the 19th century, not only with the building of the railroad, but also with the governmental surveys that happened with Timothy O'Sullivan and some of those famous Civil War photographers who you might know. They all tended to go west after the Civil War and worked on those governmental surveys. Famous picture taken at this location. These are called the Witches rock formations. It's in Utah, not far from Echo, Utah, which is near Ogden. So I have many slides here, but I'm going to plow through to the end. This is not far from the Golden Spike Historic Monument that exists north of Salt Lake City. It's really a desolate area, and I guess that's a question for me, or from me to some of you all. Like, I've just heard of LiDAR, what that is, right? It's taken from a plane, scanning or something like that. And I'm just wondering if any of, you know, with Google, with Street View or whatever, you know, it doesn't exist, you know, except when you're in a busy, you know, a populated place. I wonder what's going to happen if I try to use some of this out here in the middle of nowhere. This is a very desolate area where it's very easy to get a flat. The roads are on the old road bed, and there's spikes come up sort of with rain and weather, and they'll just puncture your tire, and you're 50 miles from the nearest person, and it's 110 degrees. So you have to be really careful when you go here. And I mean, that's how desolate it is, and it just makes me wonder if there's any data for these areas. But maybe you guys can fill me in on that as I go on. So here are just some of the pictures that I took. As I was saying, though, even the maps in the history books are chock full of little errors or inaccuracies. And I think mainly, to be fair to the books, I think it's really just a matter of scale, right? You can't zoom in. And that's what I'll be able to do maybe if I make something online or whatever. You know, even some PDFs you can zoom in on, and all the details there, and it's just a matter of how far you zoom in and out. But I don't really know a lot about this stuff. This is what I'm going to go through really fast. I'm always scared to death of not having enough slides, so I'm going to go very quickly. Just show, I have way too many, so I'm going to go very quickly through all the states that this project is taking place. This is where Lincoln stood one day on a bluff in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and predicted that many railroads would center here, and this is where the Transcontinental Railroad should go west from. There's a big argument, of course, in that because the South wanted it to go from a southern area, and the North wanted a northern one, so this is sort of in the middle. But what really allowed the Civil War to happen, or I'm sorry, the Transcontinental Railroad to happen, is the Civil War broke out, and all the Southern senators left Washington, and then they could pass the bills very easily without that opposition. You know. So this is where the railroad begins. And there's a monument there to mark the place where Lincoln stood. He was a big proponent of the railroad. Granville Dodge, I don't know if you've heard of him. He was the chief engineer for the Union Pacific. A lot of these people were Civil War trained and hardened, and Granville Dodge was one of those. This is his historic house in Council Bluffs. Across the river, I recently went out to Council Bluffs where the Union Pacific Museum is, and since you guys are geographers, or some of you are, anyway, I got to look at the surveys, the actual surveys that Granville Dodge made on paper, huge pieces of paper like this big that are now placed in these archival binders, and I got to fold them out on tables this long, and I was just sort of taking snapshots. The man who runs the museum didn't seem to mind, so I would really love, though, to go back and set up a camera stand and do it flat and level and lit properly. These were just sort of grab shots I made along the way, but it was really fascinating to sort of look at these maps. Going back and forth, I've driven the entire route once last summer, and I'm going to do it again a couple of times or more, hopefully. Between now and 2019 will be the sesquicentennial of the driving of the Golden Spike, so I'm hoping to have my project done, you know, a year or two prior to that. But I really enjoyed looking at these hand-drawn maps from the 1860s. There's a section of the railroad that sort of loops down south of Omaha, and this is one of the scandals, of course. They were being paid by the mile, so they took the meandering route south, and they're actually going a little east, south of Omaha, to make their big. It's called the Oxbow Bow route. So I enjoyed going along here. I took a trip out just a few weeks ago, and I was blessed with really warm weather, so I got to take pictures along there not long ago. Eventually it comes back to where the sort of original line, one of the surveyors had originally designed it to go where Harriman, you probably know the name, Harriman took over the Union Pacific around the turn of the century, and he plowed the railroad where it actually should have been. So this is, I call this Doc Durant meets Mr. Harriman, because Doc Durant was sort of the infamous head of the Union Pacific, who was really out to respect his own pockets. Now I have to go really fast. Oh, part of the line follows the Lincoln Highway. There's a really great book by David Howard Bain. Not his history, well, the history is really great, but it's a huge tome called Empire Express. But another one of his books that's very enjoyable to read is The Old Iron Road. And he talks not only about the Transcontinental Railroad, but the Lincoln Highway and some of the other trails, not the Santa Fe Trail, but the Oregon Trail and this sort of braid, Pony Express, this sort of braid of historic trails that go from roughly Omaha or Kansas City to the west coast. This is an old section just west of Boys Town, in Omaha, where the original brick Lincoln Highway is there. Probably from the early 20th century, though. For a long time, there's another great book called by Matz that follows the Platte. It's called the Great Platte River Road, and then a lot of the wagon trains going out west follow the Platte. So I think the Platte's really important. They say it's an inch deep and a mile wide. So I enjoy taking pictures along there as well. There's a few museums I like to stop in, and I'm trying to get permission. I got permission to shoot in the Grenville Dodge home in Omaha, but when I go back, I want to get permission to shoot some of these. They allowed me to take pictures here, but I wasn't using a tripod or anything. So there's really some really fantastic local museums along the way I'd like to shoot in as well. Fort Kearny on the south side of the Platte River. The town sort of grew up on the other side. Once the railroad went through, the fort was no longer necessary. So the town sort of picked up and moved and went over to the other side of the river by the railroad. Downtown Kearny. Goes at 100th Meridian. They had to race to the 100th Meridian to get funding from the government, so this was sort of a grand place. They stopped and had a big party once they got there. I think the west really begins at the 100th Meridian. You know, it's roughly west of the Gulf of Mexico, so that's where it becomes very arid. But I sort of enjoy photographing things along the road and gradually photographing how the landscape changes as I travel west. And right in the panhandle of Nebraska now. And I really love the places, and this will come into my use of Google Maps or just Google Maps is the satellite imagery is very useful for me to find stretches of abandoned railroad. I seem to really take a liking to that more because I think it's easier to imagine myself being there in 1865 or 6, looking at this landscape. In other areas, it's probably 90% being used between Omaha and Sacramento, but it's that 10% where it's abandoned that I find really fascinating. So this is that monument I was showing you before. There's a famous bridge also between Cheyenne and Laramie called the Dale Creek Trestle. That's quite an outstanding engineering feat for its time. I got permission to go on half of this land. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't have permission to be photographing from this side of the creek, Dale Creek. So I don't know if I'll be able to publish these pictures. I can't seem to track that person down. So the next time I go out west, I'm going to go to the town hall in Laramie and try to track these owners down so I can get a property release.
So there was a railroad well across this is the trestle right here.
Yeah, these are the footings for a wooden trestle at first, and then later on they built a spindly steel structure but it swayed in the wind, and then had to have guy wires to hold it in place. And eventually, again with Harriman, around the turn of the century, they built around to a different area. I went out in around Halloween and took these pictures, and again, I just happened to be blessed with wonderful weather. I may be doing something like this, finding historical. I didn't want to do this. There's a photographer, Mark Klett from RIT, who went out and he's rephotographed many places that O'Sullivan and others did, and he calls it the Re-Photography Project. Mark Klett's sort of in charge of it. There's other photographers that worked with him on that, and it's really quite once you go out and try to get in the right place, as Sandra was talking about, it's very difficult to stand in the same place that these people did. You know, I want 3 tripod holes from 1860 to tell me where to put my tripod, you know, and it's not that easy. You have to climb up on things. It's private property, or it's illegal, or what have you. So it's really a chore to do this. It was never my intention to do that because Mark Klett did such a good job with this. But it's almost asserting itself. I think I'm going to have to try to photograph some of these sort of my favorite spots along the way. The photographs by A.J. Russell, another photographer from the Civil War, took a few. So there's a few that I would like to actually stand in the same place. You can see I didn't have that reference with me. I sort of knew, again, because I didn't want to do this originally, but next time I go out here, I'll take the photograph with me and try to.
The dates again for this construction?
It really happened between, I would say it really picked up and started rolling at the end of the Civil War in 1865, and then the Golden Spike was in May 10th, 1869. So really those 4 years is when the bulk of the construction took place. Here again, the old line going down onto the Laramie Plain here. And I'm almost out of time, so we're in Wyoming. There's a whole stretch here that my first trip out I didn't even realize there because it's totally out of the way. And again, I think it was one of those places where they made some money taking a meandering 20-mile trip out to the country that just did not make sense for the time. It was a little easier to build there, so there might be that argument, but I'm not sure. It really looks like they made a lot of money meandering out through Wyoming.
Maybe we'll do that tomorrow.
And this is, again, I took many pictures. I looked at the entire survey that Grenville Dodge did with the last time. So I took pictures of little areas that I'm interested in, or places where I'm confused as to where the original road goes. That's another thing about, you know, the maps in books can have inaccuracies. Also, the text of books can have inaccuracies as well that I've noticed. So in some places, I tried to photograph the original survey, and I can look at where the line was in relation to, say, a river or something like that, a creek, and maybe I can find my way along that way. Coming into Medicine Bow here, I don't know if anybody knows The Virginia. It's a novel that was really popular.
In a TV show.
What?
It's also a TV show.
Is it?
It was,
Well,
yes.
I'll have to look that
It
up.
was a famous movie with Gary Cooper,
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
I believe.
This hotel is
No, not Gary Cooper.
This hotel is called Virginia, and supposedly he wrote the book there, but he couldn't have. But it's quite a place in the middle of nowhere. This bar is quite a place to visit. West of Medicine Bow, I got fooled by a little spur. Here you can see there's actually a line, and the old railroad split sort of in the center, maybe a little right center. And so since then I've been taking my laptop and I've been studying this, and sometimes I print these out so I can just have them in the field in my car in paper form, hard copy. But the original railroad is coming from Medicine Bow, and it actually splits right here, and that's that point you can see. I was on top of this sort of bluff on this county road. County roads in Wyoming are something, you know. They look really good on the map. But I have a little Echo, Toyota Echo, and I really need four-wheel drive for this. And it's a county road, a yellow line on a map. Amazing. So the old railroad actually travels along across country, and these aerial, these satellite images are really great for me to help me find my way along. So that's been my, you can see the sort of line in the old rail. So this is when I'm happy. I remember I was photographing here and I heard coyotes howling, and it was fantastic. So I really enjoy finding these stretches of the old road. The new one's not far away, but they had bigger machines to build it and do cuts and fill that they couldn't do in 1860. Famous little town in western Wyoming called Piedmont, where Calamity Jane was there, and actually just before the driving of the Golden Spike, a train that was carrying Dr. Rand and some dignitaries got supposedly hijacked, and they were holding the train with the dignitaries, and they asked for ransom. It was the train workers, because Dr. Rand notoriously did not pay the Irish workers who here he's raking in all this money, and they wouldn't pay the guys who were out there actually building this rail line by hand. There's Piedmont. I found this place, but no one really helped me, and I found this by hand. And then, I thought, wow, this is a cut and fill. It's classic rail construction, right? And I said, this has got to be the old line. So then, of course, in my hotel that night, I look it up and Google it, and it's like common knowledge. I thought I was discovering all these things, and it's like everybody knows. So I felt pretty foolish. So I have some maps here at the end. Again, here you can see the difficulties. I scrambled up the side of the Interstate 80 is right behind me, and I almost fell going down with my camera. But you can tell that my angle isn't quite right. I need to get higher, so I need to see what's behind Interstate 80 and try to get higher to maybe get a longer lens to take this picture. You can see that they drilled another tunnel. Then we go to Ogden and over the top of Salt Lake, and it's really a fantastic place. If you're interested in this, the Golden Spike historical site is really a fantastic place to visit. There used to be a little town there, Promontory, but there was basically no reason for it to exist, so it disappeared. Then we're on the route of the Central Pacific from there to Sacramento, built mainly by Chinese who proved themselves to be fantastic workers. This is curious, though. There was sort of an argument as to when they were going to meet each other and who's going to get the funding. So the Union Pacific actually graded redundantly alongside the Central Pacific for over 100 wells, all the way to Humboldt Wells is what it was called, in Wells, Nevada. So oftentimes you can see two grades side by side, which is really sort of one of the bad aspects of this contest that the government put on to build this railroad. Another very desolate area here that I didn't brave in my little car, but I'm going to try to rent a four-wheel drive and travel this section the next time I go out. And we join up with where the railroad is. I don't gamble, so there's a fantastic canyon that just the railroads go through in west of Elko. Another section near Wadsworth where the railroad has been moved. And this, of course, that section between Lovelocks to the Truckee River was the 40-mile desert. If you've read about wagon trains at all, it's just a horrible section that people had to get through. And in their wagon trains, they typically threw their furniture and all the things they were trying to take to California, and they had to keep throwing things off to make their wagon lighter because their oxen was ready to die without any water. So it's quite a fantastic. And then the Truckee and all the trees in California were just a welcome sight. Of course, you had to be careful of the snow coming very early. Of course, we know the this is Donner Lake. This is where the Reed-Donner Party got stuck. This is just prior to the building of the, I think, 1846. I'm not sure about that date for the Donner Party. The railroad is up there. They actually built snow sheds over the railroad to protect from landslides and avalanches. And this is the summit of Donner Summit there. And then down into California, it's where the big four hatched their plot to make a lot of money and build the Central Pacific in Old Town Sacramento. But here's some of the maps and just some of the problems. They show the railroad going between Cheyenne and over to Green River, and basically it followed this dark one. It didn't go there at all, you know. So these are sort of like maps on the end pages of books that are very inaccurate. A little bit better in David Bain's book, Empire Express, but again, I think it's just there's not enough room to have the detail that I would like to have. This is even worse, but the information is very valuable to me. When exactly, this is a different book, when exactly they started building, and this is one that I can perhaps animate through Google. Alongside that book had that lousy map, that sort of crudely drawn map, but then it would have a vintage thing like this that shows this is the Oxbow route that I was talking about, and there's Day's original route, and I love these profiles as well. So I guess my this is how I've been doing things. I use Google Maps, and I cut and paste, and I use Photoshop, and I build these. I spend hours. When you said you did that whole thing in an hour, I was like, what? I spend hours on a map that's nearly useless. And again, here it's just a Google from Google Earth here, where the original or the current line is down here along 80, and this is the old line going up here. So I want to try to get over there and take as many pictures as possible. So I guess that's it. I just wanted to throw this up and show you what I'm doing, and I'd love to be in contact with anybody who has ideas. Thanks for listening.
Is that questions, Roger?
So I was just searching here, and somebody has done a Google KNL for the Transcontinental Railroad. I haven't looked at it yet, so maybe we'll look at that before we leave.
Yeah, I looked at one, and it had the yellow the push pins, right? And one of them I looked at did not have one stretch of abandoned road, so I was not
Yeah, I mean, you can
impressed.
fill in all the details that you have.
Yeah, go in, maybe help out. There's a geographer out in Stanford, Richard White. I don't know if you know that name, but he's doing a project on how railroads built the West. His son is a photographer, and he's going to famous places that Alfred Hart was a photographer who photographed the building of the CP. And they have a thing, you go to a website and you can see the historic photo, and you just use a slider and slide his contemporary photo back and forth over it. So we might have to do something like that. But I don't know, I'm going to meet with him when I go out there. I don't want to step on his toes if he's already doing this, you know, so I'm going to do something different.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The other thing you might want to do is get a GPS for your next trip,
Yeah, I do want to do that.
and you record it, and you upload it directly to Google Earth, and it's there.
Right. There's a Nikon with my camera. I can spend $100, I think, and it's actually
Oh.
attachment to the camera that
Perfect.
it'll just record it every time I take a picture.
Right.